welcome back, listeners around the world, and of course to our good friends in the cosmos. I'll be your host for the next hour plus, Ghost Man Sean Burris, the best in the Midwest, broadcasting from the crossroads of America. This is your place for the strange, your Shadow Nation. Oh my God, it's so good to be back here in studio with you fine folks. I got Bob the Alien right behind me. He's got my back as always, and we're here tonight to bring home another great episode of the Shadow Nation. So there's been so much stuff coming on. I wanted to remind you guys, coming up in August, late August, I got to look it up real quick. I think it's August 25th, 26th, and 27th. You have to look it up. PopCon Indy. I'll be giving 2 days of presentations, and I'll have a booth set up there so you guys can come over and you can hang out with the Ghost Man and sit down and talk to me, and maybe we can do some Ghost Box sessions together and party hardy, man, all weekend long. So make sure you check that out, PopCon Indy. They don't have me on the website yet as a speaker, but rest assured I am going to do that this year. It's going to be, hopefully it's going to be one hell of a show. I'm putting on a big presentation and going to bring out all my stuff that I got and just have a sit down and talk with you guys and discuss and go over all the stuff that I've gotten over the years. So you don't want to miss that. PopCon Indy in August. I should be up on the website shortly. It should already happen, but it's not. So it should be up there soon, but that's PopCon Indy. I'm not doing the Kentucky one that's next weekend or the following weekend or whatever. So anyway, tonight we're going to be talking to one of the owners of what's quickly becoming known as one of Indiana's most haunted locations, the Indiana State Sanatorium, that's now closed its doors. But the new owner, Greg, has opened up the doors, and he's going to take us inside and let us know everything about what's been happening, how he acquired it, and everything you need to know about that place. So that's going to be a good episode tonight. So I wanted to say, I was looking up some stories to talk about tonight, and there's really nothing out there for the paranormal. I was actually reading an article this week that was talking about ghost hunters, and it was called Creating Proof of Ghost, and it's been out for a while. This is no new article. Ghost hunters use customized tech and tools to create the image of a scientific endeavor. So right there, it's telling you ghost hunters, basically, we have to use the image of scientific or the customized tech and tools to create the image of a scientific endeavor, which we're doing the best we can with what we got, right? We take the stuff like EMF meters. We know that humans produce electromagnetic fields, so we assume that in death, EMFs might be given off by ghostly apparitions, things like that. So that's why they use EMF field meters in the field. But anyway, it says ghosts have entered the realm of scientific. Ghosts can be experienced, measured, and proven according to ghost hunters. The scientific study of the paranormal is quite common now in American popular culture. In 1990, the Atlantic Paranormal Society, TAPS, was formed, of course, in Warwick, Rhode Island. TAPS defines its purpose as helping those experiencing paranormal activity. Although TAPS was not in the United States' first ghost hunting organization, it's amongst the most popular, going on to feature in the popular television show Ghost Hunters, which began airing in 2004. Ghost Hunters was one of the first paranormal reality television shows to engage in parapsychology model of ghost hunting. Basically, it goes on. I'm not going to read this whole thing, guys, but it basically goes on. It follows a group of famous YouTubers, which you see that a lot anymore with famous YouTubers, especially in the ghost hunting community. I had my TV shows, and I don't want to do 2-hour-long YouTube presentations anymore. People's attention spans aren't that long, and I think it's better to do a slide of shorts for people to see when activity's happening and to see the story, and just keep it in shorts and put it out there for people to watch like that. That's what I've been doing, at least with dead sessions and doing the ghost box sessions at night and stuff like that. And when I go to a haunted place, that's exactly what I'm gonna do. But this article in the Anthropology News talked about basically ghost hunters having to create, let me find the exact, the end of the article says, although investigators pine to use symbols and scientific looking equipment to signal an intellectual authority, they must also rely on creating folklore to ghost hunt. Okay, so, and I'm not going to disagree, because they're basing that in the Anthropology News, they're basing that whole article off of television shows or famous YouTube stars that have their niche, you have to have something. Okay, let's just say that when you're filming and you're out somewhere, you won't see it from me. You won't see it. You've seen it on some of the past stuff I've done before. I've told you all, it's no big secret. There was no faking in anything I've ever done, but there's overreacting to things in the paranormal community because they don't always catch them on tape when it's happening, or the thing might have happened 15 minutes ago, but they want you to reenact like it just happened. It's so the real paranormal activity happens, but a lot of times people will overreact because you, the viewer, want to see. Trust me, I've been to hundreds of places, and you don't want to go with me on most ghost investigations, because I always tell people it's either as boring as watching paint dry or is the most exciting 5 seconds of your life. It changed your life forever. So it's a leap of faith. So that's why I always try to go with a group of good people to have a good time and to enjoy what I'm doing. And I go for love of the history of the place. So, they're talking about basically ghost hunters making up stories to confirm what they see. Like, for instance, one thing in this story, there was a YouTube group and they were using the camera equipment, the SLI camera or whatever. I don't use it. The old Xbox thing, right, where it's trying to figure out human forms. And one looked like it was sitting on the toilet cutting its wrist or whatever. So the guy tried to lead into, I wonder if someone's killed himself in this bathroom. Oh yeah, I think somebody did kill themselves in this bathroom. And boom, 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 dun, 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 cue up the music. And then we go from there and you get more and more. But the Anthropology News, they're not looking at the right places. You got to look at studies being done. You got to look at people that are taking, like me with the dead sessions. It's just me sitting in front of my camera, and I usually turn it on and do it live with you guys, or I edit it later and play back what I find. So there is no running around. There is no dun 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 music or anything like that. Now, if something big happens, of course I'm gonna show it like that. But it's just I guess it wasn't a slight against ghost hunting. It's just, it says what we already know. If you have a good story to a haunted location, of course it's going to be better. People want the story. They want the hit. What happened here? What do you think people spend so much money going to these ghost hunting locations and going to spend the night at the Lizzie Borden house? Why do you want to sleep somewhere where some dude got his head bashed in 50 whacks or whatever? Or did she give her mother 40? I forget, whatever. But you get my drift. That's why people pay through the nose for this stuff. They want the story. The story sells. And it's almost like the paranormal evidence is secondary to the story, because most people don't want to go into the details about the evidence and what it takes. That they want the evidence, but they don't want to go into the work, what it takes, that you guys know out there that are ghost hunters, that you guys know it takes, what it takes to get that evidence. It's a lot of lonely nights by yourself sitting in dark hallways and dark rooms. So anyway, with that said, I thought that was kind of a slight against it. It was basically saying without a good ghost story, you don't have a ghost hunt. You don't have evidence. You have to create a story to fit what you find. Basically, is what it was trying to say. So it's just something that caught my eye, and I thought, oh wow, here we go again. So, the skeptics are always going to be out there, as they should. I'm a skeptic, and sometimes they just get real cynical, and they jump to conclusion based off one or two projects that some people are doing, and they apply that to everybody across the board. When you grew up with the paranormal like I have, and I know people have said that, Zach Baggins says it, everybody says it, I don't care who says it. I did. I grew up with a lady of a ghost lady in my house, and everybody's seen it, and things happened, and I lived with it every day until we moved out of the house. It's just something people live with every day. Maybe they tend to talk about it more nowadays than they used to because it's more acceptable, which is great. But it's hard to tell a person like me that the paranormal doesn't exist, or because I've seen it. So it's hard though getting that proof. That I don't know if we'll ever get that key proof, but we're trying. We're out there trying. But anyway, without further ado, guys, let's go ahead and jump into tonight's guest. Opened in 1908, it served as Indiana's main tuberculosis hospital. It also served as a private mental hospital for the disturbed. Tonight's guest takes us inside of what's quickly becoming known as one of Indiana's most haunted locations to find out just what walks the halls of the old Indiana State Sanatorium. Ladies and gentlemen of the Shadow Nation, please help me welcome Owner Gregg Larson to studio. Greggy, what's going on, buddy?
Pleasure to meet you. Glad to be with you today on your show. I hope to answer your questions and tell you about the Indiana State Sanatorium.
Oh, I love it. I love it. I tell you, I'm out from that way. I used to sneak out there on my way to go to Raccoon Lake, go fishing. So it's out that way.
It's out that way. We're located in Park County, Rockville, Indiana, covered bridge capital of the world.
That's it. That's it.
Encourage everybody to visit. We are open daily for day roaming. We have overnight accommodations for paranormal investigations, that type of thing. We ask people not to trespass. I've been having some trouble with high school students late coming in here. The Park County is very strict when it comes to trespassing.
You should have girlfriend night. That's for like $20 or something. Bring your girlfriend, because that's how you get all the action back in high school. You'd spook them.
The place, when it was abandoned before I got it, it was a very popular place for high school kids to hang out.
Right.
And so, but now we find ourselves on TikTok, YouTube, Discovery Networks, and they're not the brightest bunch that come out here.
Yeah, I would say not if they're posting their stuff. But you got 200 acres of haunt here to look at. And I wanted to ask you, I want to go through from your background. Let's talk about your background first before you got into the paranormal and actually owning a place that is haunted. It's alleged that it's a haunted location. People have gotten a lot of experiences. They've gotten a lot of evidence out there. What did you do before this life?
Well, before this life, I am a civil engineer and computer programmer. I worked at a defense company for 25 years, worked on DARPA programs, creating sensors and cameras. I worked on computer software for virtual reality, all sorts of stuff like that. And I was very successful at that. Allowed me to do a lot of things, but I have an eclectic mix of things that I like to do. I'm also do a lot of medieval reenactment and other types of odd things like that.
All right.
And so I was looking for a rural place to do medieval reenactment, actually. I had no idea that the paranormal existed.
Okay.
The paranormal community existed. I had seen some of the shows on television, but that was about the alpha and the omega of what I knew.
Right.
And so I was looking around in Park County. Park County is famous for its covered bridges. It has a huge 2 million person festival every year.
Oh yeah.
And I had looking for some rural land out here. It's like, oh, I would look for some place to do events and to find that kind of thing. And I'd looked around and found a couple of farms near covered bridges, near Turkey Run State Park that were interesting. But I got outbid by the Amish. There's a huge Amish presence out here in the country,
Oh yes.
part of the Indiana. And my real estate agent's like, hey, you're not bidding very hard on these properties. It's like, you're not, it's like, oh, they're nice properties, but it's not exactly what I'm looking for. She's like, what exactly are you looking for? And I was like, oh, I'm looking for a couple hundred acres, some old buildings to remodel, good road access. She goes, I've got the place for you. And I'm like, okay. And she brings me out here to the Indiana State Sanatorium. It was known as Lee Ellen Bryant from 1978 to 2011 when it closed. It was a psychiatric hospital and a nursing home that specialized in psychiatric care.
Right.
And it was completely abandoned. About 150,000 square feet of abandoned hospitals, nursing homes, power plants, about 3/4 mile of tunnels, underground tunnels, steam tunnels, sewage treatment plants, water towers, the whole 9 yards. It was like a whole abandoned city. And I'm like, wow, that's weird. Why is it for sale?
Hey, Greg, real quick, why did they shut down and leave everything? I know that's not uncommon, but why did they shut down so fast? Were there cases of abuse or something?
It was not mental care in this country for the mentally ill. The state has really cut back on the amount of funding they give for inpatient, lock
Yes.
them up kind of psychiatric care. And so the state was really cutting back on the amount of funding they were given. That made the care worse. There was lots of, when the care got worse, the lawsuits increased. There was several cases of a good old boy took his clothes off and ran out on US 36 and got hit by a truck.
Oh no.
Another one escaped and went across the river that's on the property and got his foot caught in a beaver dam. And it took him like 36 hours to drown. And they didn't find him.
Mm,
And they had a young lady go off without her clothes on during a blizzard and freeze to death. And that's the kind of thing that gets you sued a lot. So
right.
they had about 20, 30 lawsuits. They were behind on their mortgage. They were behind on their property taxes. They got behind on their payroll taxes. And so in 2011, they lost their license to be a mental hospital.
Yeah.
And they had so many bills, they just shut down. And when they shut down, they came in through chains on the doors and no one ever came back. The banks didn't want it back because the at the time, the property had quite a bit of environmental issues. There was a power plant on the site that had burned coal for 100 years, and instead of like hauling the coal away to a landfill, they just dumped it down the hill. And so
Okay.
there's a true mountain of coal ash. The steam tunnels all had pipe in them that was wrapped in asbestos. There was a 225-foot smokestack in the power plant that had asbestos brick in it, buried fuel tanks. And so the bank was like, no way are we going to take that back. And
Yeah.
so
Right.
no one wanted it. And as funny as it sounds, it's no bank will give you a mortgage if you're going to buy a ghost town. If you're like, man, a ghost town, this seems like a good way to make money. It's not a bad way to make money.
Mhm.
But you can't go to the bank and go, hey, I got my 20% down. I'd like to loan the rest. The bank would go, I don't think so. Got a lot of problems. And so, but no matter what you've heard, Indiana is one of the most progressive states in the country when it comes to cleaning up pollution.
Right.
Most states, Illinois, Ohio, go, oh man, look, there's pollution. We should sue somebody to clean that up.
Yeah.
Okay. And lawsuits, 10 years, goes back and forth. They argue about what needs to be done, who's responsible. Indiana's got a completely different method. It's called the Brownsville program. Indiana goes, look, there's pollution. That's keeping economic redevelopment from happening. we're going to go in and clean it up. And then they take the bill and they hand it to the lawyers. But as a civil engineer, I knew that this program existed. And so before I bought it, I filled out all the paperwork. I went through and did engineering, environmental impact studies, and 1 mile of steam tunnels full of asbestos. Party responsibility, right there on the form. It says, who's responsible for this pollution? State of Indiana. It's their sanatorium. They put it in. They're responsible for it. One's 225-foot smokestack with asbestos brick. Party responsibility. You got it. State of Indiana.
Mhm.
And so I went through and filled it all out. The day I bought it, I dropped about 100 pages of environmental impact study on the state of Indiana's desk, and they looked at it and they go, touche, Mr. Larson. You are correct. Stuff that we clean up. And they've done an amazing job. The Indiana Brownfield program has done an amazing job of cleaning up the site. They spent about $6 million cleaning all the asbestos out all the buildings. They've taken down the smokestack. They hauled away 2,500 truckloads of coal ash.
Right.
Re-engineered the whole landscape out here to make it kind of a greenfield site instead of a brownfield site. And so the effect of the property having these environmental issues, most people were afraid to get it because they were afraid they were going to get stuck with the environmental issues, and no bank would give a loan. It made the property very reasonably priced for 200 acres. And that's how I ended up with it.
Now, I used to go to the Renaissance Fair every single year down at Old Deer Creek. I don't know what it's called now. It's changed names 1,000 times. But they closed that last year. You know that, right?
I did hear that.
Are we looking at another Renaissance Fair possibly in the future?
I don't think so. Once you get in the reputation for buying old and abandoned places, there's actually an alarmingly large number of old and abandoned places that are available. After I was on TV one time, I was on the Discovery Network, and I get a phone call from from a local person that says, "Hey, Mr. Larson, I saw you on TV last night." I was like, "Oh, that's neat, yeah." I have a saloon and brothel that I would like to get rid of. It was built in 1888. It was in a mining town. It was about 20 minutes from where the sanatorium is, and would you be interested in it? I'm like, I might be interested in that. And can you tell me a little bit about it? Well, it was built in 1888. It was a mining town. I was like, why do you think it's haunted? Well, there was a strike in the 1890s, and there was some African American strikebreakers came in, and there was some lynchings. I was like, well, that's kind of dark. I'm not really know if I'm interested in that.
Right.
Do you have anything else about it? She goes, well, in 1903, the innkeeper killed his wife and then killed himself. I was like, do you have any proof of that? And she dumped like 30 newspaper articles on me. It's like, oh, that's
nice.
That's interesting. And it was like, oh. And so I was like, okay. And so we ended up getting this saloon and brothel, and we allow people to go in there and do paranormal investigations. It's been a very popular destination. I was kind of surprised.
Wow, I didn't know you owned that too. Is that out in Rockville?
It's in Rosedale. It's called the Stark Saloon. The story is there was a innkeep named John Stark, and these are very Game of Thrones names. I don't know, but John Stark. He was married to Jenny Stark, another Game of Thrones name. He was 29, she was 28. They had 6 kids in 5 years. 5 kids in 6 years. She was a little overwhelmed running the saloon, raising her 5 kids. So she asked her sister, Bertha Blackadder, to move in with them. Bertha was 16 years old, moves in with them to help take care of the kids, help run the saloon. And 9 months later, Bertha has a baby via John. And so Jenny is not very happy. And so Jenny skedaddles out of town, and John's like, man, I'm stuck with the sister-in-law. I mean, I thought she was attractive enough to have a kid with, but I don't know if I want her to be my wife.
Right.
And so John starts begging Jenny to come back to town. And Jenny's like, well, I'll come back to town if you get rid of my sister. And he's like, but she just had a baby. I can't kick her out. And that wasn't a very popular answer. He goes, and she says, well, I'll come back if we get rid of her as soon as we can. And he's like, okay, I'll agree to that. And so she comes back to town. The day she arrives back in town, a letter arrives addressed to John Stark. And John Stark wasn't the only John Stark in town. His father, John Stark Sr., was in town. Gets the letter, opens it up, and is like, oh my, this is terrible. Basically, it's a letter from Jenny's aunt on her mother's side that's basically saying that she's a whore, that she's been sleeping around the town that she's been staying in for the last 2 months, and that she's no good. And John Sr.'s like, man, if I give this letter to my son, he's going to murder the girl.
Right.
But then he's like, well, can't interfere with the U.S. mail. That's a felony. And so he puts it back in the envelope, hands it to his son, and tells him not to burn it and to not read it. Well, would you read that letter? I think I would have. And
Right.
John read the letter, and he's like, oh, my Jenny. Oh, no. And he takes her into the saloon, shoots her in the chest, puts a gun under his head, and blows his head off.
Mm.
And leaves 5 or 6 kids and his sister-in-law sitting in the house. The good folks of Rosedale decide they're going to hang the sister, blaming her for everything. And they almost got the ropes out. And John Sr. got her on a train and got her out of town. And then they took them outside town the same day, dug a hole, put them both in the hole, and they're buried together on top of each other for all eternity.
My God.
So I was like, oh, that's a good story. And like I said, we got newspaper proof of all of that. And that kind of story really attracts people to come do paranormal investigations, because I thought that was going to be an interesting part of the story. But then that it was a brothel, that really got people excited. So,
well, going back, because I definitely want to jump into the Stark
I
Saloon.
know, no, sorry for wandering off topic there.
But going back to the hospital,
Yes, sorry about that.
Indiana State Sanatorium, opened in 1908. Now, when did you purchase it? What year?
I purchased it in during COVID. It was 2 years ago, so that'd be 2021.
2021. Now, when did we start having strange occurrences or things that would lead you believe that there might be activity there?
Like I said, I've told this on interviews before. I am a very hard skeptic when it comes to the paranormal.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't buy the property for paranormal investigations for paranormal reason. I thought it was just a neat property. I owned it about 2 weeks, and I get a call from the Discovery Networks saying, "Mr. Larson, we heard you bought Leon Bryant, the old Indiana State Sanatorium." I'm like, "Yes, I did." Um, and we'd love to film out there. I was like, "Oh, that's cool, but how do you know I own it?" I hadn't told anybody I had bought it. I hadn't even told my mom yet. I thought she'd laugh at me, and I thought it was kind of a weird thing to buy. And um, so they're like, "Well, the previous owner didn't own the hospital buildings, but he owned some of the property around us, and told us to go f ourselves about coming out there and film." And we hope the new owner was cooler. And it's like, well, I think I'm kind of cool.
Yeah.
Well, you still haven't told me how you know that I own it. Well, we knew it was for sale, and then it wasn't for sale. So we had the lawyer look up the property records, get your name, and we had a private eye get your phone number, and here we are. I'm like, wow, that's just a little stalking.
Mm-hmm.
You really want to film out here? And they're like, yes, absolutely, we want to film out there. I'm like, cool. You're going to pay a lot of money for this, huh? She goes, hardly anything. They don't pay much to film at your properties. But I was like,
Okay.
well, it sounds like fun. Come on out. And so we'll send a production scout out. And they sent a production scout out. I show her through the buildings. A young lady shows up, about 28, and I show her through the old tuberculosis hospitals. The grounds look like the zombie apocalypse. We haven't done any cleaning yet. Grass hasn't been mowed in 5 years. There's trees growing up in the lawns. There's abandoned vehicles everywhere. And I take her through the old tuberculosis hospital. I take her through the tunnels. I take her through the nursing home. I take her through the psychiatric hospital. Lots of oohs and ahs and what's down this hallway, what's in this room. And but finally we end up on the roof of the 5-story, the psychiatric hospital. I was like, do you like it? She goes, like it. I love it. It's like the paranormal Disney World. It's got everything. It's got a tuberculosis hospital. It's got a nursing home. It's got a sketchy mental hospital vibe to it. And when they left everything here. Every room still has all the beds. There's TVs. The people's clothes that were here are still in the dressers. Um, when people would come into state care, they were told what they could bring. They could bring 2 pairs of pants, 3 shirts, a pair of slippers, a pair of shoes, toothbrush. No one would ever listen. They would bring stuff like their wedding albums, their baptismal records, their kids' figurine collection to put on the walls, and they'd be like, "Ah, yeah, that's nice that you brought that, but you can't have that in your room because
Mm,
rules." And
yeah.
so they would take these suitcases of the people's stuff and they would put their name on it and they'd put it in a room. And so one of the things we have out here is like 500, we have like 500 suitcases with people's most personal belongings in them just left. So you
Mm.
open up the suitcase and, oh, here's someone's wedding album. So that's kind of sad. It's a very Schindler's List kind of vibe.
Oh yeah. A lot of attachments to that
A
stuff too.
lot of attachments to that stuff. Anyway, so we had gone through, and I had shown the Discovery folks the site, and it was like, "So you're gonna film out here?" And they go, "Absolutely." I was like, "Great." And I was like, "So when?" And they gave me a couple months in advance, and I was like, "Well, that's neat." It was really a big positive thing was that we were going to be able to document what the place looked like before we cleaned it up. I was at that time I was planning on doing a full restoration, which we're in the process of, but I wanted to have a professional camera crew come in and take pictures of it all before we cleaned it up. And that's why I was going to do it. And I talked to the young lady. I was like, "So, what do you do for a living?" And she's like, "Oh, I'm a production scout for the Discovery Network." So I was like, "Wow, that sounds like a fun job." It seems like a lot of people would want that job.
Mm.
Yeah, it's a in demand job. A lot of people would want the job. And I was like, "Well, that's cool." I was like, "But that can't be your only job. Do you like do all the television shows? I mean, do you know Chip and Joanne? Do you do these home remodeling shows? Do you know like Parker Schnabel who like?" It's like, no, I just do the paranormal stuff. I was like, "Well, that's neat, but that can't be your full time job. I mean, you got to do something other than just look."
Exactly.
And she goes, "Yeah, you got me. This is my side gig. I also own a couple places in Ohio where I do paranormal investigations. Me and a partner own a couple buildings, and we do paranormal investigations." I've never heard of this before, and I was like, I made a joke. I was like, "So what? Once a month, you have someone come in and look for ghosts?" And she goes, "No, every night." I'm like,
Oh yeah.
every night? You've got to be kidding me! Like Christmas and New Year's every night, like 365 nights a year every night?" She goes, "Well, the buildings aren't heated, so in the wintertime we're less busy, but definitely New Year's. Call it 300 nights a year, we'll have people in our properties." I'm like, "Okay, and what do you charge these people?" And she told me, and I was like, "Get the F out." I was dumbfounded
Oh yeah. Me too.
by what people would do and or pay for that. And I was like, I'm like, "So how does my haunted place compare to your haunted place?" She goes, "Oh, it's like 10 times better." I'm like, 10 times better? That's okay. So what does this compare to? And she goes, "There's only a few places in the country that compare to this." She says that there's Waverly down in Louisville, there's Trans-Allegheny out in West Virginia, Ohio State Reformatory. But she says you're up there just with them because everything is still here. A lot of those places are empty. They've removed all the stuff out of the rooms, and these rooms are still left as they were, and they still have everything in them. And I was like, "So what do they charge to do Ohio State Reformatory?" And she told me, and I was like, "Oh my gosh, do you want a job, young lady?" And she said yes. And she basically held my hand through the whole process to open it up to people to come in, for people to film. She brought in 2 or 3 of her teams that she really trusted, and they were really blown away by the activity, the vibe, the quality of the experience.
Okay. Well,
So we started doing that. We got contacted by a couple other of the television types. Nick Groff of
sure.
Ghost Adventures called and said, "Hey, mind if we come out?" I was like, "Well, go ahead." It's like, so we're not open yet. I just met the young lady from the Discovery Network who's like helping me promote the place. And Nick comes out. He comes out with a crew of 3 or 4, and he's like, I was like, "How long you film?" And he's like, "2 days." I'm like, "Okay, that sounds cool. Anything you need from me?" "Nope, we got it." And so 3 days go by. I haven't seen Nick. And I'm like, "Did Nick?" I asked the guys that are working with me. I was like, "Is Nick still here? Did he fall down a hole? Do we need to call the police or something?" And he's like, and I was like, "Well, I'm gonna go up and check on him." And so I go up to the 5-story, the psychiatric hospital, and I go in, and he's sitting down in the cafeteria area where they serve lunch and stuff to the mental patients. And I'm like, "Hey, Nick, what's up?" He's like, "Oh, hey, Greg." I was like, "How's it going?" He's going, "So it's going amazing." It's like, "How's the filming going?" "Oh, we were done filming yesterday." "Filming yesterday? Okay. So what are you still doing?" He's like, "Oh, we're investigating." I'm like, "Well, cool." He's like, "This is one of the most active places I've ever been." I was like, "Really? You're not just saying that because I let you film in here for free?" He's like, "No, no, it really is it's really just wildly active." I'm like, "Okay." I was like, "Sure, go ahead." And he's like, "Will you mind if we spend another day here?" And I'm like, "No, go ahead." He was here a week. He
Oh,
just
wow.
he just spent the entire week, never left the psychiatric hospital. I never saw him in the nursing home, never saw him in the tuberculosis hospital. He was just on something in the psychiatric hospital that just fascinated him. And so I was like, "Oh, that's interesting." One of the things that we had when we first opened that we have gotten rid of since then is when they left thousands and thousands of boxes of patient records.
Right, right.
And like Nick had found a room full of incident reports. Just Tom smashed Bill's head through the wall. Susan cut her wrists and tried to kill herself. And it was a very kind of dark set of incidents reports. And I think that was kind of spurring his creativity, his questions that he was asking because he had all this information.
Makes for good TV. Yeah.
Yeah, he didn't show any of them at my request, and we have since been very diligent in trying to get rid of all those records. We have burned thousands and thousands of boxes of records. I'm not saying you can't find any records anymore, but we've really gone out of our way to try to clean up the record side of things. And
Sure.
so we've done that. Um, we've had, like I said, I don't go into buildings and I don't go looking for the paranormal very often. I talk to most of my guests that are here. I give tours almost every night when people arrive, and you check in at 5. I give you a tour in the daylight, and you can be here till noon the next day. And so we give a very expansive view of how much time you get to spend here. And so we I hear a lot of what they say. And at the beginning, I was always really fascinated when people would report the same things multiple nights in a row. I was like, "Hey, that was weird. Did you talk to anybody about that?" And they would say they found something one night, and a week later, someone would report like exactly the same thing. I was like, "Well, that's an odd coincidence." And some of it was pretty explainable. Oh, the door shutter slammed, or this happened. But some of it was much more specific, where it was not quite. It was like, well, that's really oddly coincidental.
What
Nowadays,
kind of stuff? What kind of stuff, Greg, was happening?
um, the most common early appearance that we had was the mental hospital. People would be on the lower floors, the first, second floor, and they would hear definite footsteps like up on the second floor, like just as clear as day, and they were almost positive that those trespassers.
Mhm.
And most of my guests will run down trespassers. Well, they will go try to find them out because they're interfering with their investigations and they don't want their equipment stolen. And so most of my guests are pretty anti trespassers. And so there's only a limited number of staircases in the building. And so a lot of times they'll run up both sets of staircases. And then they get to the second floor and then they hear the footsteps on the third floor. and then they'll run up both sets of stairs to the third floor, and they'll hear people laughing and running up on the fourth floor.
Oh wow.
And they get all the way to the roof, and no one's in the building, and they basically lose their minds.
Oh, nice.
And I've had probably a good half a dozen different groups early on report that. And I was like, wow, that's a weirdly specific uh, recollection.
So disembodied voices.
Yeah, and footsteps, just really just footsteps. Um, the other thing is we have an eclectic mix of buildings out here. The building I'm calling from right now is a very modern building. Was built in 2008. When the hospital was built, it was built. They had a children's hospital out here for 120 tuberculosis children, and they had a separate children's hospital from the adult hospital. And it was separated by a half mile on the same grounds. But the building I'm sitting in was torn down. The children's hospital was torn down in right after the year 2000 to build the building I'm sitting in, which is a modern 6,000 square foot building. And so, what was it? Not last October, but the October before, or it must have been early November because it was right after the time change when daylight savings time ended.
Mm-hmm.
And I walk into the building, and all of a sudden, lasers and devices go beep, beep, beep. Everything goes off. They jump and scream, and they jump and scream. And I'm like, what are you guys doing? You're setting up, are you calibrating your equipment? You're sitting here in this modern building, like, look, they're like, the activity in this building is off the charts. I'm like, okay, it's a brand new building. Is there anything to do with children here? We're picking up all these children laughing and crying. And I'm like, nothing I can think of. I guess this building used to be where the children's hospital used to be, and they tore it down. It was like exactly where the children's hospital used to be. And they're like, aha. And I'm like, okay. And
Right.
so they spent the whole night like in that building, investigating in a modern building, doing EVP sessions, doing camera recordings, video recordings, audio recordings of things they were finding. I was like, well, that was weird. I thought that was a completely strange night that people would come here and pay to be here and then not go to the old buildings.
Right.
And I didn't think much about it. It's like, well, to each his own. And the next night, exactly the same thing happened again. I was like, no way. I didn't tell the guests that last night the people found something here, and they had set up all their equipment again. And I was like, are you guys like, do you guys know the people from last night? I mean, did they tell you the stories? And they're like, we have no idea what you're talking about. I'm like, okay. And then I told them the story, and they like, ha, we knew it. And so they were certain. And 3 nights in a row, it happened 3 nights in a row. And I was like, that is the weirdest thing that I could possibly imagine. Didn't happen for another 6 months. Didn't happen. Nothing. No reports. No sounds. And then, like almost exactly 6 months later, right after the daylight savings time changed back, it happened 2 nights in a row. Once again, like a Friday and a Saturday night in a row. I was like, this is the weirdest thing. And it hasn't happened since. No one's ever, people have looked for it since then, and they haven't really found anything. But without prompting, to have people say in a modern building to like figure out that it was a children's hospital, I find weirdly strange.
Yeah, absolutely. Sounds like some type of residual thing repeating itself, I don't know. So since then, you've had, I don't know, thousands of people come out and stay and collect
Yes.
evidence. I've heard a lot of the evidence posted online and stuff from the sanitarium.
Mhm.
In your opinion, what do you think's going on at the sanitarium?
Like I say, I am, like I say, I can't emphasize enough. I am a hard skeptic when it comes to the paranormal. When I give you if you come out here and get the tour, I don't tell you that Bob haunts this hallway. I don't tell you any of that. I don't tell you that this is a good place to set up your EVPs. I basically give you the history. I give you when the buildings were built. Um, there's a lot of dark stories that I have proof for that I will share with people if they ask. A lot of people ask to go in blind and they don't want to know what other people have found. For instance, if you look up Lee Allen Bryant on the web, the very first thing that comes up is in 2009 there was a murder suicide. One of the employees took his friend down in the tunnel and execution style murdered him, and then went
Mm.
across the way and shot himself in the power plant. And I tracked down what the cause was. I've heard two or three different stories. One story was that one of the employees got a 50 cent an hour raise that his friend thought he should have gotten, and so he killed his friend over a 50 cent an hour raise. We're talking like $11 and $11.50. But then later I found out it was kind of a love triangle kind of thing, that the guy stole the other guy's girlfriend and he was cheating with her. And so um, stories like that are, I'll tell you if you ask about them. I'm always collecting them, and it's odd to say that you collect macabre stories. I met the old medical examiner of Park County. I was like, "So hey, so you're the guy who used to investigate all the deaths out at Leon Brown?" He's like, "Yes." I was like, "There's a lot of them." He goes, "Oh, a ton of them." I was like, "Yeah." I was like, "Really?" He's like, "Oh, mostly in the nursing home, mostly old folks dying in the nursing home. People go into the nursing home and die." But there was quite a few suicides and other things that had to be investigated for police, for the authorities to say, hey, this wasn't murder, this was uh, a natural death, or it was a suicide.
Sure.
I was like, what's like the worst death that happened out there? And he's like, oh, that's easy. I was like, oh, that's easy. I was like, I was expecting him to tell me about the murder suicide or the girl that froze to death. He goes, no, there was a good old boy. We don't know if he was cold or he wanted to kill himself, but he stole a pipe wrench from the maintenance department and he opened up the steam line running into his room.
Mm.
And he filled his room with 180-degree steam. And they didn't find him for like 6, 8 hours. And he sous vide'd himself. He had cooked himself. And so when the medical examiner came, the meat was just coming off the bone and he had died
Mm.
due to steam. It's like, wow, that's a terrible death.
Yeah.
And so those are the kind of things that people are investigating. Um, I kind of have a challenge right now. I was so dumbfounded by the story from the medical examiner. He's a doctor local, and he's like 90, 85, 90. He's really old now. But I didn't have the wherewithal to ask him, which room did it happen in? Is it room 305? Is it room 407? What room did it occur in? And so since I heard the story last fall, I've had my guests trying to tell me which room they think it was in by talking to the spirits or talking to the ghosts to see if anyone knows, because that to me would be a little bit of proof, because I don't know what the room it is, so I can't tell you which room it is, and so I can't give away the plot of the story because I don't know the story. And so
Right.
sometime this year, I'm going to go back to the medical examiner and say, hey, which room did this occur in? And so
Oh,
hopefully you'll remember.
that'd
So
be great information to have for
that's
EVP purposes.
yes, that's one of my little tests.
There you go. Well, let's jump back and forth here. Let's go back to the Stark Saloon, Rosedale,
Yes.
Indiana. Hell, I've never even heard of Rosedale, Indiana. I've lived
Yes.
here all my life. Um, have you spent the night there?
I have not spent the night there. I have spent too many days putting in a new bathroom, rewiring it. But
Mm.
I have not spent the night there. It's a creepy old building. It's the Indiana State Sanatorium is 150,000 square feet of buildings. I mean, thousands of people have died here. There's tunnels, there's old buildings, there's new buildings. I can see why people find this place interesting. The Dark Saloon, though, it's not much bigger than a big modern house. It would be a big house for 1880.
You're right.
but as a modern house, it's not a particularly big house.
Does it still look like a saloon? I mean, it was
Very,
operational.
very, very much like a saloon. It was operating as a saloon, I think, until the 1980s.
Mm.
So they didn't close after the guy killed his wife. They sold it to somebody else, and they kept running as a saloon. Um, and it's still got the obvious saloon. It's got the room upstairs that everybody in town says was the brothel. Um, Terre Haute itself, I
Oh,
didn't know
God.
this until recently, it was called Sin City.
Yeah. Al Capone loved it.
Al Capone loved it. They had, like in 1910, there was like 400 brothels in town. I mean, it was an crazy number of brothels and prostitution in the area. And Rosedale is not very far from like Al Capone's hunting lodge. They had like a gentleman's club out there north of Terre Haute, where they would come down from Chicago and drink and hang out in the woods.
Right.
And so Rosedale is really pretty close to that. But everyone in town says, like, after I bought it, like, that place used to be a brothel. I was like, yeah, kind of why I bought it.
Gonna
And
reopen it.
reopen. Yeah, well, at one point, like I said, it wasn't. It's always a question of the demand for these kind of buildings. One of the things is I was like, man, if this doesn't work out as a paranormal location, like I say, I'm not a hard investigator, and I trust people that I work with. Like I say, whenever we get a new property, we asked several of the famous YouTube people who do it to come in, and so we do that, but we don't. I don't personally go in and investigate it myself, and so we make sure the buildings are safe and sound. We make sure that you don't fall through the floor, but we leave the buildings as much as we can as they're kind of in the original state. But we went through a wall and we found, like I said, it looks like you would find the old brothel, a big common room with couple little rooms in it, a rear staircase that came off the back of the bar, and everybody says, "Yeah, that's where it used to be," and it's definitely town lore that was the town's brothel, uh,
Mm.
even even into the 20th century. And so it's like, so that was
Kind of
enough convincing for me.
ghostly sightings have been reported there. That,
Yes. Once again, I expected everybody to really focus in on the murder suicide, because I always found that the more you give people information, the more they fascinate on what you tell them. If you tell them, sometimes when I'm giving the tour out here at the Indiana State Sanatorium, I was like, the tour goes right by where the murder half of the murder suicide occurred. I'm like, oh yeah, this is where the murder suicide occurred. And then they set up their equipment there, they investigate there, and so the next day I get a lot of feedback that they found stuff there.
mm,
But if on the tour, if have been busy, I'm tired, I just forget to mention it, they don't as often come back and say, I found something there. And so with the Stark Saloon, I really expected all of the paranormal stuff to occur with the Stark family, with John, with Jenny, with their kids, because the newspaper articles we have all the information,
right.
more information than you could possibly imagine. I mean, it's like a six full newspaper page article about it. It gives people's names. It tells you like a minute by minute thing what happened that day. And so I was like, man, if I give this to the guests, they're going to really focus on that. But honestly, I would say more people have had experiences with the brothel side of things as opposed to the Stark Saloon kind of things. Um,
Right.
I don't know if it's a fascination with brothels. I can't quite figure it out, but people have really reported a lot of activity with the brothel side of that building as opposed to the Stark Saloon. I'm not saying people haven't investigated the Stark Saloon or the Starks and the murder suicide, but the brothel has been probably a much more of a surprise to me.
Yeah. Now going back to the tuberculosis hospital, um, Indiana State Sanatorium. What's the body count, Greg? Did you know roughly ballpark how many people have lost their life since the 1908?
Yes, it's about 5,000 people have died out here over the last 100 years. About 2,500 people died during the tuberculosis era. During the tuberculosis era, it was kind of a place of health. They really are trying to make people better. People would fight to get into the facility. People would, it was a state facility. They apportioned beds here by the county that you were from. So if you were from Vigo County, I guess it's Vigo County. Vigo County might get 4 beds. Hendricks County might get 8 beds. Small counties might get 1 or 2 beds. And if the bed from your county was occupied, you couldn't go. And so people would write the governor and people would write their representatives saying, hey, I have tuberculosis. I really need to go to the Indiana State Sanatorium to get better. But it was a very political, very intense way to get in. Sometimes, like say, if there was an opening in your county and no one else was going, you could get in easily. But if there was, some people had a 5 or 6 year waiting period, and so people would move from county to county to try to get residents in a county so they can then get into Indiana State. And
There
so,
wouldn't have been many other options except Central State downtown. I mean,
right, exactly, and that was more of, I believe, a mental hospital than a
right?
tuberculosis hospital. There was another tuberculosis hospital in Indiana down by Evansville, down in the southern part of the state. There was a second hospital, but people really tried to get in here, and so the facility really was about as nice as it could be. I mean, it looked like a golf course. It was manicured. They had 200 staff that lived on site to care for 250 patients. It was really a kind of a grade A location. Um, they cured tuberculosis in the 60s and they closed the facility because tuberculosis just went away with antibiotics. They finally figured out a cocktail of antibiotics that cured tuberculosis, and a disease that had been haunting humanity for thousands of years pretty much just went away. It's come back a little bit today with antibiotic resistant TB, but even then, it's still much more curable than it was. The site sat empty. No one, it was not a hospital for about 8 years. State employees lived in the buildings. They kept the sewage treatment plant running. The state had hoped that they would be able to use it for something else, and so they just didn't abandon it. And in the mid 70s, 3 accountants from Chicago with the middle names Lee, Allen, and Bryant, the Hine father and 2 sons, approached the state and said, hey, we would like to open a nursing home out at the site. And the state's like, oh, that sounds like a good idea. They approached the county and said, hey, we'd like to open a state-of-the-art nursing home. We'll do it on the condition that you close your county nursing homes and move everybody to our new facility. And the county's like, oh, that sounds like a great idea. And so they spent about $5 million in 1970 dollars. They built a brand new nursing home. They hired like 100 people. And they went to the county and said, hey, we're ready for you to move all your old folks over. And the county's like, we changed our mind.
Right.
It's the kind of thing you should get in writing. You should never like just take someone's
Handshake
word.
and smile.
Take someone's word for it that they're going to close their nursing homes and move everybody there. And so the administrators of the place, the owners of the place, panicked. And as luck would have it, up in northern Indiana, there was a hospital called St. Anne's that was closing, a mental hospital. And the state of Indiana was desperate to like place patients because they couldn't keep them at St. Anne's anymore. And they went around the state and said, hey, could you take 2, 3, 4 patients into your mental hospital? And Leon Bryant says, we'll take them all.
Wow.
And so over like a 2-week period, they moved like 250 mental patients from St. Anne's to here. The county lost its mind. Like, you didn't tell us you're opening a nursing or a mental hospital. And Leon Bryant was like, well, you said you were going to give us old folks, and you didn't. And it got off to a bad start. But the nursing home story, they did finally open as a nursing home also in addition to the mental hospital. And during the what was it, 25, 35 years that it was operating as a nursing home, probably another 2,500, 3,000 people died in the nursing home just from old
Mm.
age and that kind of thing. And as close as we can tell by talking to the sheriff, talking to the medical examiner, about 50 people died in the psychiatric hospital. People that, like I said, drowned in the river, jumped off the roofs, ran out naked into the roads. And
Yeah.
so, even though the least number of people probably died in the psychiatric hospital, most people report most of the paranormal activity in the psychiatric hospital.
You know what's so crazy, Greg? And me and you were talking before the show started a little bit about how they dump these poor people out in the streets. The thing about it, well, I was a cop for 5.5 years, and I remember every night I would get the same call, or every other night, on a
Mhm.
guy sitting in the middle of Washington Street, flipping off cars naked. And they closed Central State Hospital, and they would just send them to Wishard every night, Wishard Hospital. And Wishard Hospital couldn't keep them, and they
Right.
would turn them right back out. That is sad how the state did that. I mean, we don't have many facilities anymore.
It's a different time now. The concept that you're going to involuntarily commit people, even for their own good, they just don't do it anymore. Uh,
Right.
when they closed the facility, they were able to place the elderly pretty easily. They were able to find other mental hospitals or other nursing homes to take the elderly. The worst of the worst that were here, they found other accommodations for in other facilities. Maybe that was like 20% of the patients, but a good half of the people, they just put them in vans and packed up their clothes and took them downtown and said, "You're free. Here's $100. Check
Yeah.
in with the county health officials. Try to get some help."
Yeah.
And they let some of them go. I mean, I still talk to people that says, "Yeah, some people that were here 11, 12 years ago are still homeless down in Terre Haute." So,
Oh yeah. Now, both of us being men of science, we both I believe in the paranormal because I told you before I grew up with it. So
mhm.
seeing's believing. Um, and you're skeptical. I'm
Yeah,
skeptical, but I've seen and heard these things. Um, there's one thing we can both agree on, I believe, is that energy cannot be created or destroyed.
correct.
It can only change from one form of energy into another. And I
Yes.
think a lot of these locations, especially like the ones you bought, Greg, over the years, they hold this energy. How could they not hold this dark, ominous energy and good energy, I guess, all mixed together, and in the wood of the floorboards, in the steel beams of the rafters, the roof itself. I mean, everything can possibly store this energy and play it back or keep it stored away. So I think a lot, in my opinion, without even being there, I think a lot of the stuff, what people are seeing is that stored energy. I mean, these places have to have an imprint on what they've seen and witnessed.
I definitely see that. But I approach it as a little different way. The One of the things about having the facility out here is it was kind of a very, for me, it was a very unique place, in the sense that everything up here is in its original position. The beds are in the rooms that the beds are in, and we don't move the dressers around. If the room had a TV, the TV stays in the room. If the room didn't have a TV, we don't put a TV. Even though we have a whole maintenance shop full of broken TVs, we haven't gone around to the rooms and like got TVs from the TV graveyard and put them in the rooms because I don't want so even though I'm skeptical, I'm also a scientist, and so I would feel that disturbing the scene and like fundamentally change. Oh, that's spooky. Let's put that in the room because it's spooky. Well, I don't
Right.
want to do that. I don't want to do that. I'd rather have an empty room. I'd rather have a room with nothing in it than room that was staged to look spooky or to have something weird in it.
Sure. Sure.
And the other thing, we have thousands and thousands of pages of records from the sanatorium era. And these are like state records, not patient records. They are things like how much they spent on oysters in 1911, how many how many rolls of disinfectant disinfectant band-aids did they go through? And so we have a lot of information. And so we're really trying to make the site, I want to make it so that if the paranormal is real, I don't want to squirrel it by trying to make it spookier. It's spooky enough the way it is.
Sure.
It's as true as I can make it. And
Right.
so we're trying to maintain that.
Both these places seem like amazing locations. I cannot wait to go out there and set up my gear and get cooking, brother, and see what I can find.
Like I say, we talked about before we got on the air that you're invited to come out and do a show out here and see for yourself.
Absolutely. I want to thank you for coming on the show, Greg. And I want to go ahead and flash this up real quick, guys. If you want to find more about Greggy and his amazing Indiana Sanatorium, go to www.indianasanatorium.com. And of course, I believe this is for TikTok, at @the_sanatorium_project. That's TikTok, right, Greg?
I think it's Instagram. I think it's our Instagram
Okay.
handle. I don't do a TikTok.
Okay.
So,
all right. So there's Instagram, guys, at @the_sanatorium_project. So make sure you check both those out. Go see Greg and support him, man. Support our local haunts. And remember, I'm going to be doing PopCon this year. And I got to speak to Greg before the show, and he's invited me out. So I'm going to hopefully have lots of stuff to give you at the presentation. So you won't want to miss that weekend. But Greg, thanks so much, brother. You're always welcome here. And anything you got to promote, just let me know anytime, brother.
Just one last thing, for if you want to book out here and to find information about our paranormal, our best place is, besides the website, is probably our Haunted Indiana State Sanatorium Facebook page. That is how that's how the young lady who worked at Discovery Network prefers to work. And so if you want to be out here, you'll end up chit-chatting with her. So.
Okay, wow, what a great interview, guys. I hope you enjoyed it. I know me and Bob did. Listen, if you want to get a hold of me for anything at all, check me out at my email at Sean, SHAUN, @shadownation.com. That's Sean at shadownation.com for any questions you might have, questions for guests, questions for me, what have you. Check me out at TikTok at Shadow Nation Podcast 1, just the digit 1. At Shadow Nation Podcast, digit number 1. And of course, Facebook, Shadow Nation Podcast, and all our social media. Just look up, Google Shadow Nation Podcast, and it's everywhere. So make sure you check out the website, shadownation.com. This interview will be up on there later tonight or tomorrow, and it'll also be up on YouTube. I've been trying to put them both up there, back and forth. And make sure you go to the PopCon Indy page. I don't know what site that is, but just Google PopCon Indy. Make sure you let them know you want to see your ghost man at their event and you're excited about it. Definitely, absolutely. If there's a place to leave comments, tell them how much you're looking forward to seeing me there. But guys, from the haunted back roads of America, this has been another exclusive Shadow Nation interview. Don't go changing America. You know I won't, because I love you. Good night, everybody.